Good morning, Thea. Hello, nice to
Good
see you.
morning, Kinga. Nice to see you.
It's a pleasure to welcome this morning Thea Messel from Denmark, from
Mm.
Unconventional Ventures.
Mm.
Welcome to Women in VC. I wanted, first of all, to just talk about you because you are the
Mm.
founder, the managing partner of Unconventional Ventures. It's a fund in Denmark, which you set up with another lady, Nora Bavi. But you started your career in finance. So, how did your career path lead you to venture?
Well, yeah, thank you, Kinga, for having me on today. I'm such a huge fan of Women in VC Europe, and I think it's amazing what you're doing, promoting role models in the ecosystem. So, yeah, my path to VC. Well, if we go way back, I never knew what to do when I grew up, but I knew one thing: I was not going to study economics. So I ended up studying economics and philosophy. And even worse than that, I ended up in banking right after my master's. So I have a background in philosophy and economy, and then I have a master's degree in international business, particularly focusing on China. And when I started working in banking, that was the new era of we moved away from green accounting and actually moving into the sustainability era. So my path into banking and finance was actually looking into how could a universal bank and the finance industry in general work more towards sustainability. And in that work, working with developing sustainable finance products, seeing how the financial infrastructure could be an accelerator for sustainable development, that's actually where I started to work with startups, and particularly impact startups. And in that work, it became quite apparent to me as I got to understand tech and early stage funding that there was something about female founders in this space. For one, you heard a lot about there not being a lot of female founders. That was sort of piqued my interest. So what I did was I was hosting a couple of what we call these female founder pitching contests, to see, so is there a deal flow? Is there a pipeline of these founders that it's said not to be out there? And that proved to be wrong. They are there. And through these pitching contests, this enormous high quality deal flow of startups came in. And that's where it became quite clear to me that there's a huge untapped potential here. If you actually channel towards this segment specifically and actually say that these are the companies that you want to, for one, highlight, but also want to make visible for investments. So the idea of how can we actually make this accessible, not only to invest in these founders, but also be attracted to these founders. And that's where the whole idea of Unconventional started. And parallel with that, I'd also developed a couple of reports looking into the funding gap. And we also, in the Nordics, so I'm based in Copenhagen, I'm Norwegian myself, I'm brought up in the most equal, wealthy region, part of the world, actually. And despite that, and despite being a region very famous for our equality, we're actually not doing, we should at least be doing a little bit better than the global average, or at least better in the UK and better in the US. And that just wasn't the case. So that's where sort of the idea for Unconventional started. And on sort of on a personal side, I could also see sort of how unconscious bias was such a structural integrated part of how ideas and things were evaluated. I have two girls myself, and I think as I grew older and became more and more, how do you say, had practical experience with what does actually unconscious bias mean, and how does it actually evolve into practical obstacles. That's where I got quite convinced about this could be a huge thing to actually channel funds this way. But then, being a newbie into the VC world, then there's all the complexity about regulatory constraints and who can invest and these things I luckily didn't know anything about before taking that decisions, but now I'm much wiser. So yeah, so that was the idea. And then I was fortunate to meet one of my really early backers back in the summer of 2018, which is an incredible person. Her name is Arlen Hamilton. She's the founder and managing partner of Backstage Capital. And she was the one who really made me understand that we can actually do this. We could set up a fund, set up an entity that could invest like this.
Mm-hmm.
So long story short, that's sort of how I moved into the world of VC.
Wonderful. And that was in 2018?
Yeah, so I quit my job in the autumn of 2018, and then started fundraising for what would be the sort of the first fund of Unconventional Ventures, and that was a long process. So I started sort of full force setting up for a 2 to 3 million euro fund, and it went really fast in the beginning. I think the first 2 weeks we got like 11 backers, like big famous European funds and super angels from the Nordic regions and families. So it started really good up until Christmas. And you know how fundraising cycles go. You know, you really need to close everything before the middle of December, because then it closed down all over Christmas. So when I started fundraising continuously again after Christmas, it started to slow down. So it took more and more time to get that 50K here, that 25K here. And it became quite clear to me that if I am to go for the 2 to 3 million, it's going to take too long time. So during the summer of 2019, I actually pivoted the fund model. So you know how when you set up a fund, it's the investment strategy that people actually invest in. And that actually makes the fund not accessible for people unless they're categorized as either professional or semi-professional, investing a minimum of 100K. And that was sort of a huge obstacle for a fund like this, because a lot of the investors who wanted to invest wasn't necessarily living up to those categories. So we set up an alternative investment fund, in the sense that we actually pre-selected the cases that we wanted to invest in, and then went on fundraise for the fund, which was actually a pool of companies. So November 2019, that's when we sort of launched the fund, and then it was actually fully committed, the fund, and it was fully deployed. So it was like a one in all package, where we very unconventional in the sense that the fund is closed, is fully deployed, and here's the first entity.
Wow.
So, yeah, it was but it made sense, you know, it because what we wanted to do when we set up this from the beginning is really make it also accessible. And then you need to be creative with those regulatory constraints that we have now. We need to find other ways on actually channeling that money who would like to invest in the future, and the founders that we really see potential in.
So tell us about these founders that you've invested in and these kind of companies. There seems to be a lot of impact, positive impact around them. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so it funnily enough, we actually, when I started sort of packaging these 8 companies, I wasn't that explicit about all of the companies being impact companies, so having positive impact either of social or environmental character in the core of the business model. But regardless on how I assessed the companies and what I truly believed had high potential, the thesis that we have is really, we truly believe that the winners of tomorrow will have impact at the core, not only from a risk perspective, but also from the way of engaging customers. And when you have impact at the core, it's not a nice to have problem that needs to be solved. It's actually need to have problem that is solved.
The mission.
Yeah, so it's you don't have to search for the mission, because the mission is in the problem solving. So these 8 companies, they're all founded by women. There's a couple of teams that have mixed teams. Mm-hmm. They're primarily from the Nordics. There's actually also one company from Germany. And sort of the one big sort of commonality for these founders is that they have a true problem founder fit. And that's probably one of the most important things that we look for, is that we're looking for founders who are not only truly understanding the problem, but also have experienced it, and also are on a mission to solve that problem, because it's an extremely important thing to them. So we have, out of the 8 companies, we have 2 companies that are in a category that we have coined diversity tech. So they're developing technology that are actually helping us to solve our conscious bias decision making. And that's it. It's a category that you can see in different types of verticals, but it's a category that we can really see is picking up now, as more and more people and more organization and businesses really want to tackle their own biases. So these 2 companies are helping with that. Then we have 2 companies in the area of sort of health, digital therapeutics, health tech, but also moving towards femtech. One is solving Boost Thyroid, who's solving a disease that is typically heavy on the female side. It's called Hashimoto disease. And it's a very complex disease that you need. It's related to weight loss and gain loss, or weight loss or weight gain. It's related to depression. It's a complex sort of history of how you medicate your disease. So they're actually using technology and AI to make it easier for not only the patients, but also the doctors to see how this disease is evolving for you and how you could take control of your life. Another one in that space is Progress Me, and that's actually an eating disorder solution now for the relatives, and how can they support their family members when they are struggling with eating disorders. And both of these companies, obviously, in the midst of Corona now, digital healthcare is becoming increasingly important. So very interesting with those 2 cases. And then we also have 2 companies in a category that we like to call the overall sustainable consumption category. One within fashion tech, or sustainable fashion tech, making it easier for customer to really find what fit. But the interesting part about that company is that wasn't sort of seen as an impact company a couple of years ago, but the way that they're actually solving the problem of returns in fashion. So returns in fashion is one of the biggest polluters, because typically when goods get returned from e-commerce shopping, a lot of it actually gets burned because you can't sell it again. And it's one of these taboos in the fashion industry that the Easy Size is solving. And obviously now also with e-commerce really picking up, they're riding a quite interesting wave there. And another company in that sustainable tech area is a food box delivery company. So what they're doing, I mean, within food tech and in the food delivery system, 1/3 of all crops produces, as in vegetables and fruits, are actually thrown out because they don't live up to the supermarket's beauty standards. So this team has really made it their mission to solve that problem of those 1/3 of all produce that is now thrown out, to actually deliver it nicely directly to the consumer. And they're really tapping into this kind of consumer activism and making that in a sort of value add. How can I consume, and in this case eat, not only sustainably but also have an impact with the way I consume. So that's the 2 companies within the overarching sustainable consumption category that we have. And then we have an interesting company which is in the fintech space, and what we like to call the FinTech. So it's fintech with impact at the core, and that's actually a stock exchange for music rights. A Swedish company. They have long-standing history, not only on sort of stock exchange regulatory understanding, but also the music industry and how artists and creative musicians, the way they earn returns now, even though we have Spotify, who has made the industry more efficient and accessible, it hasn't really solved the revenue streams for the musicians. So Rita Band is going in and disrupting that and making revenue streams more accessible by making it accessible for people to actually invest in the future return of a song. And then we have Panion, which is a social inclusion app. So they're really set out to make it easier for people to connect with like-minded. And they're also sort of riding that area of people wanting to move away from Facebook and have more sort of relevant relationships and also manage their community outside of platforms like Facebook, and they're providing a solution for that.
Wow, that's really an amazing group of female founders that you have.
Yeah, we're very proud of them.
There's a lot of positive impact there. There's the circular economy, the zero waste, the health and femtech stories, and just general, I guess, fairness and social inclusion. Are these the kind of themes that excite you for your future investments? These are the kind of things that you're looking at?
Yeah, so we still say that we are vertical agnostics. We don't have sort of say that we only invest in food tech or sustainable fashion tech or fintech. As a rule, we're open for all, but it needs to, besides obviously having underrepresented founders. So that's sort of the first category that needs to be checked. Well, it has to be on the team. It needs to be co-founders, either being women, people of color, or people belonging to the LGBTQ community. So those things need to be in place. And automatically, when we have that sort of category requirement, you might say, there are now some trends in what kind of industries that we're receiving when we look at that. And that's typically, and what excites us, and that's typically industries or problems being solved that are overly underestimated or overlooked in terms of solving that problem. And when we have that founder requirement, that's automatically what we're seeing. And when we assess the companies, we need to really be certain about, well, the impact needs to be at the core. So the more users, the more sales that company has, it will automatically also increase the impact of the company. So when we have the founder segments in place and we establish the impact at the core, that there is this trend of seeing the industry being underestimated or overlooked, or actually really solving problems for an underserved group. That's what excites us. And then besides, after that, when all these three things are in place, obviously, then we really go through, well, the execution so far, the founder composition, and the extension of the team. Does that sort of live up to what we really want to see in a company that can take this from 1 to 2,000 over the next couple of years?
Brilliant. Okay, that's super clear. Thea, you are investing in the Nordics, and you have recently produced a very interesting report together with Dealroom. Could you talk about the report, the mission behind it, and also give us the conclusions that came?
Yeah, so I think for the last 4 years now, I've been, whether it's been through my old job or through Unconventional, really wanted to create that increased transparency and understanding of where are we in the Nordics. We tend to think that we are so much better than the rest of the world when it comes to particularly equality. And obviously for some areas we are far ahead, but when it comes to venture and particularly early stage funding, we're still very, very sort of challenged, and we still have a lot of potential to unleash. We did the first Unconventional report last year that sort of established the funding gap in the Nordics. At that point, 92 to 93% of venture capital went to all male teams in the Nordics. And unfortunately, the same this year, it's still the same. We have 93% going to all male. We have 1.3% going to all female teams, all women teams, and then the rest for the mixed. So the report as sort of an overall is to see, track where are we, what has the developments been. One of the really important things that we look for, not only on the Nordics, but we also do on a country breakdown, because it's quite important for the different Nordic countries to sort of keep on track and see how they develop. And they develop quite differently, particularly on the mixed teams and the all women teams. But it's also looking into, okay, so this much funding, so we have 1% going to all female teams, but how many deals are we actually seeing going towards these founder compositions? So we're not only looking at the sort of the funding gap, but we're really the funder payment gap, in the sense that for every deal, you know, the female teams are getting 1/4 or 1/6, or even in some of the countries 1/8 of what all male teams are receiving. So it's really a wake up for the investor community on how we have our colleague at January VC. She actually called it the female founder penalty, that the female founders constantly gets less funding per round, so they need to run this much 3 times faster. They need to pivot with less money. They need to explore and test with less money. So it's a huge challenge in terms of, do we actually give them a fair chance to prove the potential of their business? So that's still, unfortunately, a big challenge in all the Nordic countries. What was new for this year is that we, as you probably heard about before, the BCG report really showing that actually female founded companies overperform or outperform by 2.5x. That's sort of the number that we all have heard now for a couple of years. But again, the investor community, yeah, but that's the US. How does this actually look in the Nordics? And the new of this year's report is that we could actually see that female founded companies in the Nordics, they overperform or outperform by 1.45x. So again, it's about really having that tangible data showing that it's also a huge problem, and there's also a huge potential here locally in the Nordics. So that was sort of the one new finding from this year's report. And the third, or sort of the second new finding of this year report, that we also mapped through, so what are the gender composition of the different funds that has invested in female founders, and is there a correlation between who writes the checks, so the composition of the decision makers, and actually to what extent is there more diverse in the portfolio of the funds, and that correlation we established with this report as well, and that we have seen. You know, you have Harvard Business Review reports looking into that for US investments, but now we also have this established for the Nordics. So not only is there a huge funding gap still, we can actually see that also female founded companies in the Nordics outperform, and we also know we can see that the decision makers are predominantly men. I think when we looked at the partners, we ended up at 80%, 88%. On the VC partners being male. And we can say there's a correlation. The more diverse the investment team is, the more diverse they invest. So that was sort of the really big main findings this year as well.
So would the conclusion be that it all starts with where the money is, and then as the money is first invested right at the top level, it has a lot of impact to trickle down right to the very bottom?
Yeah, and then I think what is really who, and you know about this when you have European VC, it's really about who are the decision makers and who are backing the new type of decision makers. So it's at the end of the report, one of the things that we really conclude is the limited partners really need to take a hard look at themselves in terms of what are the type of fund managers that I back, and do we see a more diversification in the types of GPs in the limited partners or the funds of funds or family offices own portfolio of funds, and I think that's really where some of the answers for the futures lie, because we can see also now from reports from the US, and hopefully we can produce that for Europe soon as well, that actually female-founded venture funds outperform. So we need more and more diversity in the type of fund managers, and we need the LPs to be more proactively in actually taking a leap of faith in emerging managers, to particularly diverse emerging managers. And that's where really one of the big sort of solutions to break this circle.
Have you already encountered some LPs that have this focus, or not really?
Yeah, so definitely. So for the first, for our first entity, those that come from has invested in several funds before, that was sort of a clear strategy for them, in the sense that they could see from their own portfolio how that looks, and backing new types of managers and new type of investment theses as well. So in a sense, we're both, not only are we diverse in our sort of partner composition, but we also only invest in underrepresented. But obviously you could also have diverse fund managers or fund managing teams that doesn't necessarily have the same thesis that we have, but you will automatically get a more diversified deal flow or pipeline at the end, portfolio at the end, when you invest more diverse on a fund manager level.
So we need to change the whole of the ecosystem,
Yes,
from the
we
top
do.
to the bottom.
Yeah, we need progressive limited partners who can see this data and actually understand how that is really so correlated to the way they invest, and what kind of partners that they choose to back.
My belief has been that we need a kind of Melinda Gates in Europe, who says very clearly that this is my strategy, this is where I'm putting my money. So a kind of leader of the LP community that, as you said, very well understands the data and the impact that this has on the choices of what we are funding. Because in a way, I guess in VC, we're privileged that where we put our money, those companies are just more likely to grow and then either benefit society or unfortunately not.
So true.
Yeah, so that has always been also my view. You know, now we're living through the pandemic, and I guess the results for funding female companies haven't been that good. You know, what can female founders do right now? What would you advise them? How can they fundraise? What's the right thing to focus on? Because it seems that the data is rather sad, with the female founders having so many responsibilities in and outside the home that they're just not able to catch up with their male colleagues.
I think the good thing is that there's more and more funds that really have sort of an external strategy articulated that they want to invest in female founders. So that's definitely a place to start. There's some big funds. I mean, Ada Ventures closed their first fund last year. They're obviously mostly focused on the UK. There's January Ventures, there's Voleas Ventures, Borsky Fund. I mean, there's many of these type of funds popping up, and as bigger the funds, obviously they can't invest in all because there's still limited amount of funds, but the bigger the group of funds who has this articulated strategy, the easier it becomes. So I would at least start with those who have been very vocal about investing in female founders, and that's a priority to them. Then reaching outside of that, really do your own due diligence of the type of fund that you're reaching out to. So make sure that you don't waste your time on someone who, if you can see in the past, they haven't invested anything in female founders, haven't had sort of a diverse, don't have a diverse portfolio whatsoever. So do prioritize the funds that you can actually see that they do invest diverse. And then as a third part, if you choose to go for someone who hasn't invested diverse, but really fits on another strategic level, really look at who are the decision makers or who are the partners that, at least if they have a female partner or have a partner that has a track record of investing diverse, start with them, because you know that they will understand who you are and what you stand for potentially better. And then so that's kind of what kind of investor should you choose or prioritize first. Then there's the other part, and that's really quite apparent now in the midst of Corona. Obviously, if you are in very heated industries that everybody wants to be a part of, like health tech, digitalizing health tech is obviously very, very important. Educational tech, all kinds of education is moving online and digital now. So that's obviously a very, very interesting area, and people will have your attention. But really focus on and make it very clear what you have managed or executed on and actually achieved without the limited amount of resources that you have. So obviously now a lot of investors are really looking for, okay, are you already now selling? Do you already have revenue?
Yes.
And even though it's very small, how has that revenue developed over the last 6 months or so in the midst of Corona, and how that is affecting both business models, but also how your potential future clients and customers are responding to your product. So besides vetting your investors and how to choose who to prioritize, really make sure that it's very clear what you have achieved and what traction you have, and if you decided to maybe, well, we should wait a little bit with launch and develop a little bit more, just get your product out there and get some customers on board, so you can actually show that your solution is sellable and that there's appetite for this product.
That's really good advice, Thea. Thank you for that. Just to conclude, I always want to ask more of a personal question. What are the kind of things that inspire you? Are you reading, watching, doing anything interesting that you could share with the viewers so that maybe they will be inspired as well?
Yeah, I saw you had that question coming up, and I was thinking, do I read? I mean, obviously I do read, but there's a lot of digital. So one thing that I always read and have done for the last, actually since I started studying, that's The Economist. So regardless where I've been in my career, whatever I've sort of been working with on the moment, The Economist is one of the areas that I always love to dive in, regardless of how work is going or regardless how personal life is going. It just gives you this incredible overview of there is one world, and there is, a very efficient way of getting an overview of what's happening in Southeast Asia at the moment, or what's happening with all continents. Actually, I just love The Economist. But the thing that I'm reading every night now, that is Pippi Longstrump. So I have 2 daughters, and the oldest, she's turning 7 in a couple of weeks, and she just got into that age that she can read some of the words. So we're sort of shifting. I'm reading the longer ones, and then she's doing the 1 to 3 letters and words in the sentence. So that's really what I'm enjoying every second night when it's my time to do the reading and the good night.
That's actually a wonderful time, because Astrid Lindgren has written so much great books. So you have a lot of great nights to go.
I do. And we just finished. So there's like this other really good book, which is Good Night Stories for Rebel Girls, I think it's called, where you have all these role models. And we finished that one. And that's a little bit more pictures and colors. But now we moved on to Pippi Longstrump. So
that's one of our favorites too.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Thea. It was great having you here with us this morning. Thank you for your really inspirational talk. And I hope we get to collaborate soon.
Yeah.
And all the best. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Kinga. Thank you for having me. Have a great day.